Welcome back to the Football Corner Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremiah Queen. And before we get started with the terrible things that happened in NFL since my last podcast episode, I'd like for all my viewers out there on YouTube to subscribe to the channel. Click that notification bell so you stay up to date when new videos drop on the channel. Also, listen to me on a podcast app like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or even Spotify. Go subscribe to the podcast. And let's jump right into it. Breaking news. And it's happened to come all from the AFC North, which is the toughest division in football. The only division where everybody's at 500 or has above 500 record. So let's start with the Browns. The Browns will lose their starting quarterback who had a record of 5-1 as a starter, and they paid him $230+ million guaranteed 2 years ago. And that's Deshaun Watson. He had fractured his shoulder apparently in the first half of that Ravens game and ended up going 14 for 14 in the second half on a fractured shoulder. But the medical staff said that in order for it not to get worse, you will need to go through season-ending surgery. It's unfortunate if you're a Browns fan because now you feel like you're just cursed. You're cursed from having anything good in life. And now Deshaun Watson wasn't playing the best football, but he was doing the plays that mattered the most, especially against a division opponent in the Ravens. You thought he was going to just go from that game and propel into something that you thought will make you a Super Bowl contender. And now you're not a Super Bowl contender. But the only thing that comes good out of it's really, okay, there's nothing come good out of this. But the only thing you could shed a little light on is that you are 6-3 and you have a top 5 defense. Now, if you could get PJ Walker to win 4 of your next 8 games, because I feel like a 10-17 is good enough for the wild card. If you get your backup quarterback PJ Walker to win 4 of his next 8 games, y'all will be in the wild card race. And who knows what happens once you get into the tournament. We're seeing it all the time that a lower level wild card seed go all the way to the AFC Championship game or the Super Bowl. It can happen. You just have to trust the process and hope that PJ Walker can steady the boat and not cost your team, but help your team and let your defense ball like they've been balling all season. So that's the first injury. Second injury is Mark Andrews, the tight end for the Baltimore Ravens, the guy that is Lamar Jackson's safety blanket, the guy that got drafted with him in 2018 is now out for the season with the ankle injury. It's unfortunate because on Thursday Night Football, he had already had like 2 to 3 catches, was rolling. Logan Wilson does the hip drop tackle, which if you've been following the offseason, the league is trying to do away with the hip drop tackle. I understand it's football, and it's going to hurt players, defensive players from tackling, especially linebackers, be able to tackle big tight ends to players that are bigger than them. But as you saw, if you watched Thursday Night Football against the Ravens and the Bengals, it was an issue. The hip drop tackle just happened to be by Logan Wilson twice, ended up hurting 2 Ravens players' ankles. One player will be out for the season, and Lamar Jackson, we'll see what will happen coming the next 10 days until his next opponent. The final injury will be against Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow sprained his wrist. And it's a good transition because let's talk about the Bengals. The Bengals were coming on strong. I mean, in the last 2 seasons, they have been 5-4 around this time, but they've never been 5-5. And I think that's the issue, is that now Joe Burrow is probably going to have missed some time, it seems like, because it's on his throwing hand. Now, if it was on his left hand, maybe he'll be able to play the next 10 days. But, of course, he's going to get an MRI. We don't know the full severity of his injury. But the way it looks like now, the Bengals are going to be without the quarterback for 1 or 2 games, and you can't afford that, especially when you're just fighting for a wild card seed, because they're not going to win the division. I never thought they were going to win the division. And if you're saying, well, the Bengals are always bounce back, and the Baltimore Ravens got lucky on Thursday Night Football, I would remind you that the Bengals have gotten fortunate and benefited off of Lamar Jackson's injury the last 2 years. The last 2 years, at the point of the time Lamar Jackson got injured, they were in first place of the AFC North. And Lamar Jackson gets injured, doesn't play the next 5 games of the past 2 seasons, and the Bengals used that to catapult into the driver's seat of the AFC North and win the division. Now the tables are reversed. Lamar Jackson is healthy, and the Bengals are suffering a quarterback injury. And they're going to, now you're seeing what the Ravens had to do with the last 2 seasons. I never want to see a quarterback injured ever because quarterback makes what the NFL is. It makes the NFL great. Joe Burrow is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and I hope he has a speedy recovery and is able to come back as soon as possible. But it seems like it's too much. It don't seem like it's the Bengals year. It seems like a lot of things are going up against them, and that's unfortunate because the Bengals are always a good contender in the playoff picture, especially in the last 2 seasons. One year they went to the Super Bowl, the other year they went to the AFC Championship game. It's unfortunate. Week 11 is upon us, and let's actually talk about the two matchups in Week 11 that has the most significance. And it's good. Number one is going to be the Broncos and Vikings game. And you're going to say, well, this game means nothing. The Broncos are in the playoff picture. The Vikings are red hot. The Vikings are on a 5-game winning streak. It matters for both. So the Vikings want to win their division, and they still have a chance. I understand the Lions are a really good team, and they're a top 3 team in the NFC. But if the Vikings want a chance to win a division, you have to win these type of games. The games away from the division to catapult those wins. The Vikings are 6-4 as of today, and they have the chance to go to 7-4 if they beat the Broncos. Now, if you flip it to the other side, the Broncos are catching a little fire. They're 4-5, and I feel like if this team gets back to 500, they feel like they can mount a playoff run because their defense is playing good football, and Russell Wilson's kind of balling. He's not flashy Seattle Seahawks Russell Wilson, but if you look at his numbers, 60 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, has a high completion percentage, top 5 in passer rating. He is playing really good football. And now that they get all those bad games, all that bad taste out of their mouth from the bad games they played, the 70 points they gave up against the Dolphins, they beat the Chiefs, they beat the Bills, and you could say the Bills are not the team that we thought they were. Well, in the preseason, before the season started, they were some people's Super Bowl's favorites. So now that the Bills are kind of spiraling and they fired their offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey, I don't want to make it seem like the Broncos didn't have a great win, and they did beat the Chiefs, who are the number 1 seed in the AFC right now. I believe the Broncos need this game more than the Vikings do because I think the Vikings still get in the playoffs via the wild card. But the Vikings want to get that home playoff game and win the division. They will actually need to win these type of games because they haven't even played Detroit yet. So if you win these games and you beat Detroit twice, then we're having a real conversation about the Vikings winning the NFC North. But if you look at the Broncos side of things, in order to even have a glimmer of hope of making it into the wild card in the playoffs, because you're not going to win the division, it would take like Herculean efforts to win the division, and it will cost the Chiefs to actually tumble. I think the Broncos need this victory more in Week 11. And let's go to the game of the week, and that's, in my opinion, that's the Chiefs-Eagles, and that's the previous last year's Super Bowl rematch. This game means so much for the Eagles. It don't mean as much for the Chiefs. The Chiefs are what? 7-2? Okay? The Chiefs will be okay. I'm going to go ahead and say that. The Chiefs are going to be okay. They are still going to be battling Baltimore for that number 1 seed as of now, and they're going to be battling the Jags as well. And I think if Baltimore is the more scarier team to get the number 1 seed because the Chiefs feel like we're already beat the Jags and the Dolphins head-to-head, so those two teams, tiebreakers, automatically rule them out. But the Baltimore Ravens, they haven't had to play, and the Baltimore Ravens are 8-3. So, of course, if the Chiefs lose this game, they will drop to 7-3, and they'll be looking at the number 2 seed when all said and is done after Week 11. But if you look at the Eagles' perspective, I think the Eagles need this win because the Lions are right there on their hip pocket. And the Lions have a really good chance of getting our number 1 seed. And I know the Eagles want the home field position throughout the playoffs. I know they want that. So I think they're going to try to get that number 1 seed just like they did last year. And this is why they were actually so beneficial of going into the Super Bowl because everybody got to go through Philly. They don't want to go through Philly through the playoffs. The Lions play the Bears in Week 11. I don't think the Bears are going to put much of a fight, even though Justin Fields will be playing. If Justin Fields outdo the Lions, kudos to the Bears. But the Bears are not a playoff team. The Lions have a chance to get a number 1 seed. And in the offseason, we knew the Lions were going to be a good team. but we didn't even think about them getting number 1 seed. The Lions play really good football, and this game, the Eagles-Chiefs, the Eagles really need this because you don't want the Lions to have that tiebreaker over you. You just don't want to have it. Thank you for tuning in to the Football Corner podcast. If you want to follow more of my content outside of the podcast itself, you can follow me on my social media pages at the Football Corner Podcast on TikTok and Instagram. Thank you for watching and listening. See you next time.